Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome into another edition of Interrupting Racism. My name is Brian Prawitz, and we're glad that you are here today on Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitch. If you're watching any place in the world, please hit us with a little message, say hello, ask questions as we go along in our program, and hopefully we can make some friends and continue to spread the word about how important it is for you to diversify your knowledge and your friends. That's what I've done in my life, and it's been one of the most rewarding things that's happened. And it's especially rewarding because I'm able to share conversations with other people that I have come to be friends with through a network called ALF, the American Leadership Forum of Oregon, which I'm sure you're going to hear something about in the conversation we're going to have today. But the American Leadership Forum of Oregon is something that has grown my network, has introduced me to new people and new leaders in the state of Oregon. Well, they're not new. They're new to me. Leaders throughout the state of Oregon that I've become friends with, and their perspectives and experiences when shared with me have literally changed my life and my perspective on things, and the people that I'm accountable to and the people I can reach out to learn more about the important issues that face us in the state of Oregon and in our individual communities. And so I'm glad that you're here and that you found Interrupting Racism, and hope that you share your experience with us and maybe share some of these things out into your network so that we can work to interrupt racism. Today on the program, I'd love to bring on and introduce to you one of my new friends, aforementioned. When you talk about building new friends and new networks, say hello to Brandi Tuck. She's the Executive Director of the Portland Homeless Family Solutions. I added a the. It's not the. It's the Executive Director of Portland Homeless Family Solutions. Hi, Brandi.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Brian. Good to be here.
It's nice to make your acquaintance and have you on the show. It really is. Brandi is currently in ALF. She is in class, are you 38?
Yep, class 38.
38, and the virtual class. You will forever be known as the COVID class, I suppose, of ALF. And the challenges that come from that, for sure. But first of all, we're going to talk a lot about homelessness today, not only from the experience that Brandi sees every day in her line of work, but also I think there is going to be quite a bit of education that happens in this program today. So take everything that you think you know about homelessness and put it on pause for a minute and just listen to what we learned from Brandi today. No pressure. I guess I kind of loaded that on, didn't I? Brandi is going to blow your mind or your money back.
I'm up for the challenge.
All right, cool. Well, first of all, tell us about what you do. Tell us about your job and maybe a little bit about Portland Homeless Family Solutions, Brandi.
Yeah, so for the last 14 years, I have been the Executive Director at PHFS, Portland Homeless Family Solutions. Our mission is to empower homeless families with children to get back into housing and stay there. We operate 4 main programs. We operate a program for families who are in housing, who are about to lose their housing, usually through an eviction because they haven't been able to pay their rent or their utilities. We help those families keep their housing, prevent their homelessness, and never have to lose their homes in the first place. We prevent the trauma, we prevent all the things that are associated with homelessness, and it's way more cost effective. We only invest about $1,200 on average per family to prevent homelessness before it even starts. When families do experience homelessness, when we meet them when they have already lost their home, we help them in our rapid rehousing program, where families who are experiencing homelessness get help moving back into housing. We provide rent assistance and case management to help families keep their housing, and we do so for a long-term period of time so that we can really make sure families are stable. And then we operate emergency shelter. So I am here in our Family Village shelter. It's the first and only shelter in Oregon designed using trauma-informed design and architecture. We house 25 families, it's about 75 to 100 kids and parents at any given time, in this shelter environment where they stay for, on average, about 2 months, but our maximum length of stay is 4 months. And the goal is to help all the families in shelter move out into permanent housing.
And you can learn a lot more at pdxhfs.org. And if you just scroll down, you'll see quite a bit of information, videos that tell you all about the impact that PHFS has. And I encourage people to reach out and check that out and learn more about all of those things. So, Brandi, you are talking about one aspect of homelessness, obviously, with families. I mean, already just right off the bat, I'm thinking of all the perceptions of homelessness, and your proof through your program that homelessness includes so many children and families out there, and they may not be the people you see every day. They're almost invisible on some level. Am I right about that? I mean, they're harder to find maybe than the person on literally on the street corner.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Oregon Department of Education reports that more than 22,000 students in Oregon experience homelessness every school year. 22,000 school kids in our state. That doesn't include their little brothers and sisters or their parents. In over a decade at PHFS, I have seen that every year, over half of our kids that come through our shelter and housing programs are under 5. They're not yet in school, so they're not included in these Oregon Department of Education numbers. I would argue there's another 20,000 little kiddos out there, plus all the parents. 50, 60, 70,000 kids and parents that are experiencing homelessness in Oregon. And you're right, we don't often see the kids and parents because the parents are really afraid that experiencing homelessness is enough that the state of Oregon will take their kids from them and put them into protective care, foster care. And that's a really big fear. These are good parents. These are parents that work. They have jobs. They are good folks. They know how to be a good, loving family. They are just experiencing some cause of homelessness, and we can get into those in a minute as well. And they really just need a little bit of support to be able to get back into housing.
Are they all good parents? Are they all just experiencing homelessness? Are they all just, I mean, there's certainly, I mean, there's, variations upon every single thing. So how many people actually would lose their children if they were to reach out to the state or receive some or be found?
Yeah, so hardly any of them would lose their children. That's actually a myth that people who experience homelessness believe, that experiencing homelessness is cause enough to have the state take your kids, and that just isn't true. Homelessness is not a reason why your children will be taken from you. It has to have some sort of abuse, neglect going on in the household for the children to be taken from the parents. As long as there could be situations, and there is a small fraction of families that we've worked with that have had children removed, and that's usually for some other reason that is not connected to the homelessness situation: mental health, domestic violence, abuse, neglect, something like that. And the majority of these families really are having folks that are having a hard time.
And are you mostly, so we have a couple of different ways to look at all of this, by the way, which is the Portland area and then the rest of the state. And we have people all over the state of Oregon. So we might need to delineate a little bit on metro area versus the rest of the state, because I think my perception, and this may actually, the correct title for this program today might be Mythbusters, because I'm probably going to throw a bunch of stuff I think out there and it's probably going to be wrong. And you're the expert on this for sure. I have a little bit of experience in what it's like on this side, in a smaller town, I should say, but you are without a doubt the expert. So when you are talking about families experiencing homelessness and the things that you just described, are you referring to the Portland metro area, or is it just is the same truth the same whether you're in rural Oregon or urban Oregon?
So the Oregon Department of Education, this says there's 22,000 students in Oregon that experience homelessness. 3,300 of them are in Multnomah County. So a seventh of the kids are in Multnomah County. There are kids and families all over the state that are experiencing homelessness. Certainly, we don't see them. Like I said earlier, these are folks that tend to hide. Some ways that folks hide is they do something that we call doubled up, which is or couch surfing, where they'll spend a night or two on my couch, and then a night or two on your couch, and then mom's couch, and then friend's couch, and then do another circuit back around. And it's not literally sleeping outside. You're not in a tent. You're not on the street. You're not in your car. but you're in an incredibly unstable situation. And imagine being an 8 or a 9-year-old that has dinner in a different place every other night, that doesn't have a consistent place to brush your teeth, that doesn't know if I'm going to be sleeping in a bed by myself or with my siblings or with strangers. Who's going to be in this house? Are there people coming and going? Is there drug activity? Is there safety? So, I mean, it even though it sounds like, oh, that's not so bad, it's not a place meant for human habitation to couch surf and jump around from houses every couple of days. And there are a tremendous number of families all over the state that are engaging in couch surfing and doubling up.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly aware of some of those numbers and some of that activity in Douglas County when it comes to students who are experiencing homelessness as we speak. And could you imagine? So what's that like from distance learning? What's that like with COVID-19? How many more complications can come in to an already complicated situation? Tell us about a little bit of what you see out there right now.
Yeah, so it's been really hard for the kids that experience homelessness. And so I think to help us understand what's going on for people who experience homelessness, let's go ahead and talk about how homelessness affects the brain. So we know from brain science that there are 2 different kinds of stress that all of us experience. There's positive stress, which is called eustress, EU stress. And it is the kind of stress, like I have a new puppy right now. I'll tell you, having a new puppy causes some eustress, or finals week at school, or doing a podcast interview. It's stress that is usually positive and motivating. It can be really hard, and your body releases chemicals to help you deal with this stress. And when it's a eustress reaction, your body releases chemicals that do things like promote emotional regulation, engages critical thinking and logic and rationality, and it gets to the point where you're like, wow, I really aced that test, or I had a great presentation. We probably all felt that feeling of being really stressed and then like nailing it, right? That's your eustress reaction. Then there's something called distress, and that's toxic stress. That when the brain experiences toxic stress, goes into a different chemical reaction that if this is your brain, this is your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that enables us to have all of our human brain functionings. So our language, our speech, our cognition, all the things that humans do that dogs cannot do. So our prefrontal cortex, when we're in a distress response, our brain releases chemicals that turn the prefrontal cortex off. Completely offline, unplugged. It's a chemical reaction. So even if you tried really hard, you can't stop those chemicals because your prefrontal cortex is offline. You don't have the human center of your brain available. You have what's sometimes called the lizard brain, the prehistoric brain that all creatures have, that regulates digestion, heartbeat, breathing, sleep, all the kind of autonomic things that our body does. And so when you are in danger, your body's going to turn off your prefrontal cortex, and you go into your fight, flight, and freeze mechanism, which I sometimes call survival mode. It's that part of your brain that gets you ready to lift the car up off the kid, right? Or to fight a wild animal whenever you engage with it in the wild. And in those situations, these brain chemicals are super helpful, and they help save your life. These same kinds of brain chemicals are released whenever we experience things like domestic violence, abuse, neglect, and homelessness. So whenever we experience homelessness for days, weeks, months, or even years, our body is in this stress response pretty much that whole time. And so we don't have our logical, critical thinking parts of our brains available to us. We are reacting out of our fight, flight, or freeze survival mode, where we can only focus on survival. We can't focus on learning and education and getting my job and keeping my house clean, because we are literally in that survival mode where we are ready to lift the car up, but we're not ready to have a conversation like this because our brains are not in those modes. And so when we talk about kids right now during COVID, during distance learning, all of us are having a community trauma response right now. Like the whole world is walking around like this because of COVID. And you add homelessness on top of it, and it is overwhelming to the brain. The brain is not able to cope. And so what we were seeing with distance learning is that families were so overwhelmed, they were not even engaging in education. Distance learning was not a thing that our kiddos were doing. We chatted with David Douglas School District here in East County, Multnomah County. They reached out to us early in COVID because they wanted to try to find the kids that they didn't know where they were. They had said that 10% of their student population, 1,000 kiddos in David Douglas, were missing at the end of last school year. They hadn't talked to them one time since we started distance education. So when we went back this fall to school and we started distance learning again, we saw the same thing happen. Kids just couldn't engage. Their brains were overwhelmed. They just weren't turning on the computer and getting on their Zoom classes. So we actually hired an educator to come on site to work one-on-one with both the kids and the parents to support them in engaging in their education. We just happened to have some funding from the county to be able to do that. And it's been a real challenge for our families.
And you pile that on top of the normal sort of challenges in a classroom. You know, you got to, I've learned a little bit about ACEs. You know, you've got kids that have gone through severe trauma in their lives that are just trying to sit still in a classroom and pay attention. And now some of those boundaries and the brick and mortar element of that's gone. I mean, it just really takes away the foundational motivation to even try to learn how to sit still in a room. And so it's just, it seems exponential. And it also seems almost, I don't know, how do we begin reining that back in? What are some of the answers to addressing maybe not necessarily getting our kids out of that prehistoric brain, but also just people who are currently experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, and so that's a big piece of what we do at PHFS. It's called trauma-informed practice and trauma-informed care. And I said earlier that our shelter that I'm in has been designed using trauma-informed design and architecture. So trauma-informed practice is the understanding of what's going on in the brain when someone experiences something as stressful as homelessness. And so it's understanding that our lid is flipped, that we don't have our prefrontal cortex, and it's understanding behavior through that lens, and then modifying our behavior to better serve the person who has experienced trauma and stress. And so some of the things that we talk about in trauma-informed care are building dignity for people, making sure that people know that they are worthy. When you lose your housing, when you lose your home, so much power and dignity is stripped from you, and you feel really worthless and you feel really inadequate. And so when we see folks in our programs, that's how they show up, just feeling horrible. They're in their trauma response and they just feel like they have failed. And so a big piece of it is trying to replace that dignity and help people get their self-confidence back. It's about choice and empowerment. We believe that the people that we serve, the families that we're working with, are the experts in their own lives. They know their lives, just like you know your life, Brian, better than I know yours. And why would I try to tell you how to live your life when you know your circumstance way better than I ever will? So our work is not to tell people how to live their life or where to live or that they have to get housing. Our work is to help people come up with whatever their goals are. We listen for change talk, whatever kind of change talk a family might say. I wish that I had a different place to go. I wish that I had a big screen TV. Whatever it is. And you say, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's dig in. What would it take to get there? And we work with the family on whatever their goals are. Most often that's housing. It includes housing. People don't like to experience homelessness and be in this stress response where the world is unbelievably confusing and scary. And so it's also about autonomy, giving people privacy, allowing people to set their own schedules and their own days. And these are things that we've learned, right? When I started at PHFS 14 years ago, we did not know this yet. I did not know this yet. The world was starting to learn this, but we at PHFS didn't know this yet. And so we had things like really paternalistic schedules and routines for shelter, where it was like, if you are not here between 12 and 12:30, you do not get lunch, right? Because this is our schedule. And now we have the opposite. It's that if you want to eat, you are a free person. You can eat whenever you want to eat. And if we don't have food made, we'll help you make food, or we'll make food, or we'll find some food for you. Because it's your decision when you eat. I shouldn't be telling you when to eat lunch, and I shouldn't be telling your kids when to eat lunch.
Brandi Tuck is with us here on Interrupting Racism, as she's the Executive Director of Portland Homeless Family Solutions. I wanted to get a little bit into some of the causes of homelessness. We touched on that just a little bit. Again, a lot of perception out there about what can lead to homelessness for families and individuals. What's your experience in this part of it?
So I would say there's many causes. The causes of homelessness are varied and complex. And I can boil it down to a few. Homelessness is caused essentially because housing is too expensive and jobs don't pay enough. So that's one of the primary causes. And the big primary cause too we want to talk about is racism. So we'll get to racism in a second. But housing is too expensive, jobs don't pay enough. We've pretty much had homelessness in America since America was founded. We've always had people that there haven't been enough jobs, there hasn't been enough housing, and largely the government stayed out of it. The government didn't really help solve people's homelessness at all until the 1930s, when we had the Great Depression, the greatest economic downturn that we have seen maybe until recently. But it was the first time in American history that the federal government stepped in and said, okay, we're going to help alleviate the effects of the Great Depression. And what they did with that was they created the New Deal. The New Deal created programs that helped people go back to work at living wage jobs. It helped, revised how the mortgages were given out. Before the New Deal, you could only get a 5-year mortgage for your home. New Deal revised the mortgage rules. Now you can get a 25-year mortgage, and how much easier it is for the average person, average white person, to be able to own a home and pay it off over 25 years instead of 5. So people are getting good jobs, making good incomes. They're getting home ownership. People are being able to own homes through this new mortgage reform. The New Deal created things like entitlement programs, the Social Security program, and the unemployment program. And all of these good social programs in conjunction with World War II stimulating our economy lifted America out of the Great Depression and got us back on a strong economic footing. And all of those things that we just talked about were available to qualified white people. For everybody else, the Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks, LGBTQ community members, immigrants, people with disabilities, all of those folks were not included in these wealth building and wealth accumulating strategies, but they weren't left out. The New Deal created the Federal Housing Administration and started investing $80 billion a year into creating and maintaining housing all over the country. And this was one piece that ended the homelessness associated with the Great Depression. And we created enough safe and stable housing for everyone in America to have a place to live. And from the 40s all the way up till the 80s, the federal government continued to invest in building and maintaining this housing, and homelessness essentially went away. And then in the 80s, the federal government slashed the budget of the Housing Administration from $80 billion a year to $20. And the effect was that all of this housing, what I call an infrastructure of housing all over the country, fell into really bad shape, got into bad repair, disrepair, new construction halted. And by the time I was little in the 90s, I remember on TV seeing big, huge apartment complexes that had been deemed the projects being dynamited because they were in bad neighborhoods or they were in bad shape, and they were deemed that they were not safe for people to live in anymore. But the reason they weren't safe for people to live in is because the government stopped keeping them up and stopped making them be safe places to live. We attribute that because it's Black, brown, and indigenous people that are living in these things. We are attributing the disrepair of the building to those folks, but it's not. It's their white landlords who did not take care of the property and acted as slumlords in a lot of situations. And so we tore millions of units of housing down. If we went around and tore down all the bridges and overpasses, we wouldn't be able to claim to have a national transportation infrastructure, right? And that's literally what we did with our housing infrastructure, is we built it up and then we tore it down. And the result is now we have lower supply in our housing inventory. Nationally, we're short about 5 million units of housing for every person and family who needs a place to live. In the metro area, we need about 50,000 units just for the 3 counties here in the metro area. And so what happens is the laws of economics tell us that when supply is low, but demand is high, what happens to price? Price goes up. Right, exactly. So that's what's happening all over the state of Oregon, all over the country, is that we don't have enough housing infrastructure for all the people that need a place to live. So prices are going up. Jobs don't keep up. We are still at, now Portland is at a $13.25 minimum wage, but most places are still at $11 for minimum wage. That's $25,000 a year in income. You're making $1,600 a month take home. And this is just simply not an income that people can afford these really expensive housing prices on. And so that is really at the heart of it. It's an economics thing that folks do not have enough money. Housing is considered affordable if it costs no more than 30% of your income. So if you are a minimum wage earner in Portland making $13.25 an hour, you basically need to find an apartment in Portland to rent for about $650 a month, right? And you laugh, like you can't find that anywhere in this state right now, especially not in Portland. And these are the salaries that people are trying to raise their families on, and it doesn't work out.
So I haven't ever sort of had an education in the history of the way you laid it out. And so what you said was that, in so many words, that in a large part, the housing supply and demand situation really tilted away from supply. The supply dropped off and homelessness really rocketed at about the same time as the projects essentially around the country were coming offline, right?
That's right. In the 80s, early 90s, we had an epidemic of homelessness, and the government chose to respond again. The government chose to, like we invested in the housing administration 50 years ago, they chose in the 90s to invest money, but they didn't invest it in housing. They invested it in emergency crisis response systems like shelters, street outreach programs, mobile clinics. And so we now spend billions of dollars a year on emergency response systems to now support all the people that don't have housing. And since the early 80s, we haven't made any meaningful investments in housing in this country. And that's one of the big reasons why we are where we are today.
We could go off into all kinds of little trails all over the place, but where is addiction in all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the research shows that usually about a quarter of the general population of people that are experiencing homelessness have some sort of addiction. Ask was that a cause or an effect of their homelessness? And I think that that's a really valid question to ask. Whenever you, this is such a complicated question. So whenever you experience homelessness, right, we know that you are in this fight, flight, or freeze response. And what happens when you're there is you're looking for danger around every corner. You're body is in a state of heightened awareness, scanning your environment for danger everywhere that you can go. And so that's really hard for the brain. And the brain then takes a couple of different fight, flight, or freeze are the responses that it takes. Fight, the fight response looks like really fast speaking, not having coherent sentences, being loud, being aggressive in your face. It's fighting, right? People often confuse that for drug use. They confuse it for methamphetamine use. And sometimes people maybe are on meth, or sometimes people who look like they're on meth might also just be in a trauma response. Same thing for the freeze mechanism. Freeze is dissociation. You go blank, you stare. I mean, I talk about at PHFS, a mom might be sitting on the couch, baby will fall off the couch, mom doesn't even flinch, right? It's not because mom doesn't care about her baby, it's because mom is in a freeze state and she doesn't have that ability to respond. It kind of looks like you might be on heroin. And maybe you are, and also maybe it's just a trauma response. So I want to make sure that we say that, because I think there's a lot of assumptions out there about what people's behavior is caused by, and we need to really check our assumptions. And still, certainly, people who experience homelessness struggle with addiction. And I cause or effect, when the world is that confusing and scary, you find ways to cope, right? And one of the biggest ways is self-medication and self-soothing. So people do medicate using drugs and alcohol. They engage in other risky behaviors like unprotected sex or prostitution. They will do criminal behavior, steal things to get money. And it leads, what that leads to is that this prolonged exposure to homelessness ends up leading to these negative activities, which can then result in disease, sometimes disability. Then that can result in early death. And so the average life expectancy of someone who experiences homelessness is only 49 years old. And so this is how urgent this crisis is that we are literally, by people being outside and experiencing homelessness, they're literally dying early. And so sometimes addiction can cause homelessness, and I think a lot of times the homelessness causes the addiction.
Yeah, I had quite a debate one day with a reporter about housing first as a theory. Is it better to get somebody treatment or housing? And I think I've come around to thinking that housing first is the way to go. You have to give a person stability and eliminate maybe some of those variables that lead them to need to be addicted in order just to cope with things, because all the things that you described right there really feed into the behavior that we see on our streets here, even in Roseburg and in Douglas County, because it's really, I don't think there's a city in Oregon that isn't experiencing having some people, in some state of unhousedness. What are some of the solutions then? Is it we're not going to fix this or make an impact on it until we have enough homes for each person? Because there's the other side of this, and this used to be my argument. Maybe it still is part of my argument. I've talked to people that manage those homes where the person in addiction treatment who has experienced homelessness lives, and the destruction and it's awful, and did they learn, and they relapse, and it didn't take, and I mean all these things that I hear. So I'm going to just kind of lob that ball at you and see what your response is to some of those responses that I know you hear also.
Yeah, I think it's the solution. I still believe the solution is housing, right? That we have got to find housing solutions for every single person who is outside. There's a lot of belief that people are choosing to be homeless. I think people can choose to not go to shelter because shelters can be a very traumatizing place. And I think if you really got down and really got deep and in a trusting relationship with these folks, the vast majority of people do not want to be outside. They want to have a home. They have experienced some severe trauma that makes that transition back into a home seem really scary and be really difficult. And they still, at the core of it, want to get back into a home. And so, yes, we have to create or somehow find housing for all of these folks. There's a big discussion up here in the metro area right now about alternative shelters, tiny home villages, places like Dignity Village and Hazelnut Grove, if you are familiar with those programs up here in Portland, where they're kind of self-governed outdoor camping environments that have services and they have safety and hygiene and water and, you know, all those kinds of things. Connection to services is a big one. And so there's a lot of conversation about what do we do in the meantime until we can get all this housing built. What we're doing now is not working. Just letting people camp wherever they want in any community, it isn't working. It's not safe for anyone, the housed or the unhoused population. And so we have to come up with some other alternative model. And something that I've heard about and I've been thinking about a lot lately is, if we're gonna do some of these kind of alternative villages, is there a way to create some alternative villages that can function for the next 5 to 7 years as more of a housing situation, where they have heat, there's running water, there's electricity, and they're not a home, you know, with a 2-bedroom apartment kind of thing that we traditionally think of as a home, but that they can be way better than what we have right now, and they aren't nearly as expensive as building a $200,000 apartment.
Yeah, that's an area that I've spent a little bit more time on that I like to talk about, because first of all, back to one of the points you were making there, the big question for me is, where do those resources come from, though, to build every person a place to live, for instance, if in a perfect world? And I don't really know the answer to that. And communities like Roseburg and other small towns are trying to figure that out, because otherwise it comes out of the general budget. And I'm sure there's some federal programs, you can probably find some grants to pay for some of it, but who pays for trying to house all of the people that we are talking about right now?
Right, and that's the big question. And I think that no local community, not even Portland, is going to be able to do this on our own. San Francisco, Seattle, LA, Portland, New York, Miami, New Orleans, these are major cities who all have homeless crises in them right now.
Yeah.
None of us have been able to figure it out, right? Like, it's because we're not going to be able to figure it out. It's going to take some big investment in the federal government to be able to help this whole country get out of this crisis. And there's sometimes a controversial mechanism that's talked about as a step in the right direction. Right now, when we look at all of the housing subsidy that the government distributes to Americans, 60% of federal government housing subsidy goes to the top 20% of income earners through the home mortgage interest deduction. Only 40% of American housing subsidy goes to people living in poverty. If we were to reform the mortgage interest deduction tax code, we could come up with billions of dollars that we could invest in a federal level all across the country to be able to build and create the kind of housing that we need. So it's very controversial, because the people that get those mortgage interest deductions are very powerful and have very strong lobbyists. And so anytime this has ever come up over the last 40 years, it's been kind of a non-starter. Until recently, I've started to see it change. Here in Oregon, in our last legislative session, there was actually a bill in Oregon to reform Oregon's mortgage interest deduction. And what I think the proposal was, if you were an income earner making up to $125,000 as a single person or $250,000 as a couple, you get your mortgage interest deduction. No one's going to do anything. You get to keep it. So, like, as the average homeowner like myself, I would keep my mortgage interest deduction, right? Once you started making those higher incomes, more than $125,000, more than $250,000 as a couple, then it would start a gradual decrease of how much that you would be able to get. And that kind of system, even here in Oregon, just doing the Oregon tax code, not even tackling the federal one, would have brought in hundreds of millions of dollars per biennium that we could invest. And so it's going to take something big like this, changing a major part of our tax code that lots of Americans have come to enjoy over the last, many, many years. But it is possible. It's just going to take a bigger coordination than the Portland metro area, or probably even just Oregon. It's going to take the whole country.
Well, when you talk about the big cities and their struggle to deal with this too, it's relative. The size of the problem is relative to the size of the community. So around here, we have maybe there's 250 or 300 homeless people that we are aware of who are experiencing homelessness, I should say, who are in our area. And in Portland, it's like, dang, we'd love to have 300 people to have to deal with. But for us here, it's relatively, it's almost the same.
Yeah, per capita, for sure. And you think about Medford, Ashland, Roseburg, LeGrand, it doesn't matter where you go in Oregon, everyone is experiencing this kind of crisis.
Yeah. And in different places, it kind of ebbs and flows. We're having a crisis right now because the nights are very cold and we're not able to have a warming center right now. COVID is part of the reason why. The city is taking efforts to try and find a way to build some shelters and working very closely with the folks at Rogue Retreat. Working on, we've created a homeless commission here. I say we because I'm a Roseburg City Councilor, and this is a thing that's happened recently. This homeless commission's job is to find shelter space or create it from emergency shelter to brick and mortar actual shelter to a tiny homes model, for instance. And the most encouraging tiny homes model that I've seen was actually Emerald Village in Eugene, which is a Square One Village project where these are just 400 square foot houses, and they actually challenged architects in the community. I would love to do this, by the way, in Roseburg. I just don't know if there's enough resources actually to pull this off. But what they did in Eugene is they took a very strangely shaped piece of property that was never going to sell, and Square One Villages bought it. And then they challenged all the architects and all the builders in town to draw up and build these small houses with electrical power and full bathrooms and a functioning kitchen and certainly some living space. And I think this is brilliant. And I hope we're able to pull it off here. They then would take people through an application process and vet them to make sure that they actually did have income, and a couple other things like there were no sobriety rules, but you had to be able to live in a community and kind of follow some rules and get along basically with your neighbors. And so there's a little checks and balances like that. But then they were basically, I want to say given, but they weren't given the home. They were assigned a home, and they would pay whatever 30% of their income was to rent the space. But the best part of it for me was they also had an equity account that was being added to, even if it was $50 a month. There was money being put aside so that eventually, if that person wanted to leave this tiny home, which, by the way, there was no pressure to, they would actually have first, last, and deposit potentially in this account, that when it got to $1,500 or something, that was the most it could be. So over time, you're actually building equity to eventually possibly move into an apartment and get away from that communal living. And I love the model. And it inspired me to go to work to try to build some tiny homes here. And we did. We built 2 small ones. Pretty expensive, I think, probably to repeat the model, but at least we got it through the first time in the city of Roseburg to actually build a tiny home. And so now the city has a little bit of a template, and if somebody else wanted to do it, not to mention the ADU rule at the state level that's changed. So theoretically, you could put an additional housing unit on your property if you wanted to, but that model of that Square One Villages model, and I think that's similar to Rogue Retreat, but I'm not completely sure, was very encouraging when I saw it, especially when the community and the architects and the builders really took it on. It was like, you have $15,000 to build this little house. Of course, a lot of things were donated, and some of those houses are pretty swank, and they're probably about $40,000 to build instead of 15, but they're on their own foundation. The utilities are buried. Some very good ideas that are out there. And I've always told people, it's not how to house people, it's where and who's going to oversee it. Because also, I don't believe, please, here, I'm going to throw another myth at you to bust, possibly. Have we seen a set and forget type camping site or program for people to exist in that has worked? Or does it require an organization or some kind of supervision, or at least even security at night?
Yeah, really good question. So I think that model from Eugene is awesome, right? I mean, that is a great way to, even if it is $15,000 or $20,000 to build a unit, think about how expensive
It's really cheap.
It's really cheap.
It's really cheap.
It's like the cost of like half of a bathroom, right? In a 2-bedroom apartment. And so I think those kinds of models are really creative ways to go about this, and to be able to give people the dignity of being able to pay for their home. People want to do that. I mean, when families move out of shelter, you know what they say? Some of the parents, they're like, I can't wait to clean my own bathroom. Like, I know it's so dumb, but I want to scrub a toilet, like I want care for my
because it's my toilet. Yeah,
it's my toilet, it's my kids. I want to clean my kids' toilet. It's just that ownership of being a parent.
Yeah.
And then the savings account, I think that is also genius, because it's so dignity building for people to be able to then leave and have a nest egg to be able to go get their unit or whatever they need. And so I think that would be super fabulous to be able to do something like that. And I think, what was your second question? I just lost it.
Oh, I was rambling for a while there. I'm not sure I remember my second question. I knew a set and forget type living arrangement where people might be able to come and plug in and get out of the weather, and maybe even be able to set up a tent and and sort of like a place to be. Let's put it that way.
So there are some, I think about Dignity Village here in Portland, and C3PO and Hazelnut Grove, and some of the organized camps that are here, that, I think that there has to be some sort of structure, but that structure can be a self-governed structure. And that's what's so beautiful about many of these organized camps here, is that it's not an organization or the city or the county coming in and saying, here are your behavior guidelines, follow them. It's folks from the community getting together and saying, okay, we need to create a different place for people. How are we going to do this? And what do we want this place to look like? And how are we going to make sure that it's safe for everybody? And then it's self-accountability. It really is about folks taking ownership of the community and being able to manage it. And certainly folks who are going through some behavioral health challenges or need some deeper permanent supportive housing support, those folks will need, intensive services and case management and visits and on-site staff and those kinds of things. And that's certainly a model that we need to look at as well. And I think that's the key, is that it's a whole spectrum. We need the whole spectrum of everything, that folks that can completely self-govern, and there's no organization other than themselves that are telling them what to do, all the way up to this, clinical case managers on site helping people daily with their medications and their therapy and things like that.
Yeah, when you put it that way, though, it's really hard to try to get motivated on where to start, because it's almost like you can't start with one prong. You have to come out with this whole litany of services, and that's expensive and difficult to do, and probably not realistic, because some of this stuff has to happen in phases. You couldn't possibly like roll it out all at once. But I have a couple things I just want to bounce off of you to get your take on this. So, I've been involved in Roseburg now for a while, trying to understand homelessness on a better level. My theory early on was, if there were people out there who wanted the help and could take the help, I think people in this town, and probably a lot of places, would bend over backwards to help them. And I was in search of people who were either willing or interested or could even take the help if it was provided. And I was really disappointed, because I found very few of the people that I found out there who were receiving services or that were available to me to see. It seemed like a very large percentage of those people were either maybe beyond reach, or that's unfair because I'm not a professional, so probably beyond my reach. I'm looking for people who would say, yes, please help me in some way. And it just seems like a really, really small slice of the population out there experiencing homelessness are capable of saying that or doing it. And I think it was a very naive way to come into it, but I think a lot of people think that way. Like, hey, I'd love to help somebody if they could use the help. The problem is people are very complex. And so they have a lot of issues and challenges going on. So you can't just walk up and say, hi, I'm here to help, and expect them to jump up off of the bench and accept the help. But where I'm going with this is there's the policy changes, which I think are very important. There are probably some perception changes that are very, very important for the community also to understand, to learn more about what's going on out there. But the thing that I've seen happen that I keep encouraging people to think about is when I have talked to somebody on the street and asked them for their story and asked them what they need and why are you homeless and what can be done and just get to know them just a little bit. It's amazing what you find. There was somebody here who had an injured back and couldn't work and appeared to have some mental challenges and some things that he needed some help with. But his big thing was he didn't have his ID, so he couldn't buy a plane ticket to fly back to his daughter on the East Coast. And this is a big, scary guy, even though he was very gentle, as it turns out, but he was very intimidating, and he was on our street corner downtown. And we rallied up. First of all, we had to get his birth certificate from Tennessee so he could get his ID, so he could get on a plane, so he could go back. Okay. These are things that can be done for people. These are not impossible barriers. And I've found other people that are in similar situations where they need somebody who's resourced to go help them get a thing so they can check this box so they can move on. And the personal attention, almost like a college counselor, that personal advocacy, I've seen it pay off. And when church people or people in the community say, geez, how can we help? I always encourage them to literally adopt somebody, like go find out what the struggle is in this person's life and then help them through it and be ready for them to not show up on time at times. And maybe they, don't follow through completely. You kind of have a lot of patience. This is my big theory. This is the thing I keep throwing out there to people to say, I think that one-on-one attention could be one of the best ways to, one at a time, very slowly begin to move the needle. What is your take on all of that?
Yeah, I think so. Remember, when the guy's on the street corner, he doesn't have his prefrontal cortex available to him, right? So when you go to him and you ask him for like a logical question, hey, do you want this? And he's not able to respond in the way that you want, it's probably because his brain is not able to even understand what you're saying. They say that when you're in this trauma response, when you're in a distress response, your brain can only understand every third word said to you. So they might literally have no idea what you're saying. And so this idea of this person-to-person connection, what that does is it starts to bring the brain back online. That when you get up and you take a walk with someone, when you regulate, like when you're standing within someone's 15 feet of someone, your heartbeat energies, the electromagnetic waves coming out of the heartbeat affect each other. And so you can literally start changing people's energy. You can, that connection and that relationship and that trust is really what helps bring the brain back online. And so once that brain is back online, you can ask things like, what do you need? How can we help you? Oh my gosh, it's just a birth certificate. I can't tell you. We get birth certificates and IDs for almost every single family that we work with because people lose them in this experience of homelessness all the time. It's like one of the biggest barriers of people. And so I think that individualized attention is really, really critical, and treating people like people. And, with folks missing appointments and being rude or not making it, remember, they're in their fight zone. So they're missing their appointments because they don't know how to tell time right now. They're being rude because they're in their fight response. They're not answering your call because they look at the phone and they say, I don't even understand what these words say. Am I that dumb? I can't even look at this thing because it is so overwhelming. Like, I'm stupid. How did I get stupid? And then it's like this self-deprecating spiral that's really, really harmful for people. And so I think the one caveat I would say that personal relationship, I always say, talk to people, just have a conversation, give money. If you want to give people $5, give them $5. It doesn't matter what they buy with that $5. If they need to buy a beer, it's probably because they needed a beer. Let them, or if they buy a sandwich, it's because they're hungry. Don't dictate how people are coping with their situation of homelessness, which is so systemic. We haven't talked that much about it, but homelessness is not an individual failing. It's a result of systems, of the systems that were set up in the New Deal, of the systems of redlining and oppression and racism that have created the racial wealth gap that keep Black, Brown, and Indigenous families at the poverty line, having $0 to $10,000 of net family wealth, versus white families who have on average $170,000 of white family wealth. And it's these systems that are perpetuating poverty. Whenever we are providing services to people, there's a big chance that we can trigger that trauma and make it even worse. And so people then won't want to come receive services from us and won't want to engage in relationship with us. So we have to make sure that when we do that, we're engaging in a trauma-informed way and we're not re-triggering people.
Yeah, I'm glad for that. I knew there was a but coming at some point, a little bit of a warning on that. And thank you for that. I think that's very important. I know that you have another appointment here in just a few minutes, so I want to wrap it up. But any final thoughts here, Brandi, for any of the things that we've been touching on here?
Yeah, I think just because it's an Interrupting Racism podcast, I started to touch on this, but I think this racial wealth gap and discrimination in the housing industry, redlining, housing discrimination, housing rental application discrimination, it really is one of the biggest causes of homelessness. We know that at PHFS, 60% of the people that we serve are Black, Brown, and Indigenous. We know that people that are Black, Brown, and Indigenous are overrepresented in the homelessness service sector all over the country. And when we look at the numbers, there are these graphs out there from this organization, SPARC, S-P-A-R-C, supporting partnerships for anti-racist communities, I think is what it means. And so they have these graphics and this data that shows the general population of what percentage of the general population are Black and white. And then it shows what percentage of folks that experience homelessness are Black and white, and what percentage of folks who experience poverty are Black and white. And all of these numbers show us that what we see is Black folks are only 13% of the population. They're about 22% of folks who experience poverty, but 46% of the folks who experience homelessness. And these numbers, and then when you look at white folks, they are, the graph goes up, this much of people of the population, there's a little bit more in poverty, and then it goes way down for people in homelessness. And so this graph shows us that it's not about poverty. Poverty is not the reason that people are experiencing homelessness. It's really about race.
Well, in Douglas County, I've always struggled with this as well because we are 90. Well, actually, we have about a 15% Latinx population here, and about 1.5% African American, and also Indigenous. I think is somewhere around maybe 3 or 4% in the county. So we are not 100% white, though some people will say we are. But poverty here, I think, looks a little different than maybe in a metro area. I'm saying maybe because I don't know for sure. But in my ALF time, I would say, well, gosh, you're talking about an African-American population that's in poverty. It sounds what you're describing, generational poverty, education issues, sounds like a lot of the things that we deal with in rural Oregon as well, but they're white. And it maybe there's, I don't know, there's a lot of causes for it. And so maybe the statistics might be a little bit different in Douglas County than it is in Multnomah County when it comes to those factors. But I think it's important to bring those up. And we here in Douglas County need to be aware of that impact as well, because we probably would also see a very disproportionate number of the people that we're dealing with talking about experiencing homelessness also being people of color and Indigenous.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I think, when we talk about folks that are experiencing homelessness, I just lost my train of thought. I'm gonna lose that. I forgot what I was gonna say. But I think that I know what I was gonna say. So I think when we look at rural populations and we look at poor white people, right? White people who experience poverty, their circumstances look really similar to Black people who experience poverty, right? And we can sometimes think that a white person says is, yeah, but my family has that too. And what we're saying is that certainly white people can experience the same kinds of hardships, but one of the things that's creating one of your hardships isn't the color of our skin, right? That certainly we could have people in incarceration, and intergenerational poverty and abuse and addiction and all the things, and still we have a sense of white privilege because our skin color isn't one of the things that's making it harder for us. All those other things are, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Brandi, it's been a real pleasure to chat with you. Your energy and expertise is spectacular, and we hope that people will head over to pdxhfs.org to learn more. I'm going to do something I normally don't do, and I'm going to send you out of the little streamcast here so I can wrap up the housekeeping stuff I need to do. So I'm going to say, have a great day and have a great meeting here at 3 o'clock.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good to chat with you.
Hope to meet you again soon. Brandi Tuck from Portland Homeless Family Solutions. So a couple of things here at the end of the program that we always like to talk about. First of all, comments coming in from a lot of people, from Lisa and from Melissa. I guess many comments coming from the two of them. And yeah, Lisa saying it's also about protecting wealth and sustaining systems of oppression. It really gets into a lot of depth, the homeless matrix, if you will, all of the things that contribute to the conversation that we're having here today make it so complicated. But we can't give up. There's got to be some answers for some people. And that's where I keep coming back around to what can you do personally, individually with people to try to help them in their moment of need. A few things for you. First of all, we talked a lot about ALF today, and you can find out more about the American Leadership Forum at alforegon.org. Highly recommend you do that. Also, if you'd like a shirt like the one I have on right now, go to speakupwithus.com. The revenue from the sale of these shirts goes to the Black United Fund of Oregon. We are glad that you are with us today, and we will be back again soon on Facebook and YouTube, and also now on Twitch. I'll be interested to see how many people watched this today on Twitch. But we know that there are audiences in all those places, and we hope that you will share this podcast streamcast out into your network as well, especially if there are people that you know who would learn from anything that Brandi shared with us here today, or any of the other episodes that are available on the Interrupting Racism YouTube channel. I'm Brian Prawitz. Thank you for being with us today, and we hope that you are able to go out and have good conversations with people, find people that you can talk to. Connecting with people right now is hard to do, but it is extremely satisfying when you can chat like we did today with Brandi. And in the meantime, look for ways to basically help a neighbor and do what you can to interrupt racism. Thanks for being with us.